Good afternoon. My name is Timothy Galvin. This is a project for Southern New Hampshire University's History 100 R1026 class on the importance of the Electoral College. All right. So let's start off with how the Electoral College prevents some problems, okay? Now, do you believe the president should have a broad base of support? Should your vote count if you live in New Hampshire or Maine or some other small state? Should there be a system for voting for the presidency that makes corruption more difficult? And do you believe that that mob rule is dangerous? Well, if you answered yes to any of these questions, then you are actually in favor of the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College was created by the Connecticut Compromise at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and it is the institution that makes your vote actually count by using an indirect voting method. Now, why should New York, California, and only large states with large populations matter? Well, they shouldn't. So the Electoral College ensures that there is a broad base of support for the winner. It discourages corruption by making large population states less important. And mob rule is more difficult, and it is the most ruthless of tyrants. So for this project, we have to analyze some of these things through the historical lenses. And they're presented in this course with three: political, social, and economic. Now, primarily, the Electoral College and how it was created is a political issue. Now, there were many plans proposed at the Constitutional Convention, and compromise was the key to actually getting something done. Now, this compromise occurred because everyone agreed that the chief executive of the United States should not be beholden to any one state or that state's agenda. For instance, if Virginia, at the time the largest state in the colonies, or the foundling America, wanted to create a presidential candidate, they could outvote anyone else because of their population. Now, we believe today that the leader should have the broadest base of support possible, which is how we ended up there. Now, historical lenses, with the political, we cross into the social. And the social is how we deal with people interacting with people in power. And in the social historical lens of this situation, the compromise that created the Electoral College was not popular. People were very unhappy with the people in power, and it required significant selling. As a matter of fact, Alexander Hamilton devoted the Federalist Paper number 68 to this very issue because people could not quite understand why this was chosen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And lastly, the economic lens. Again, what was going on economically? Well, Congress was ultimately granted the power to tax and tariff, and who controlled that power and how it went into effect is an important thing. The Connecticut Compromise for the Electoral College included 3/5 of the southern states' slaves when assessing representation, which has to do with how many Electoral College votes states are given. So southern states were given a little bit more influence. All right, moving on. Who should choose the President of the United States? Well, when we looked at the Electoral College, there are different ways that could have been done. The popular vote is what was talked about mostly now. In that case, majority rules. It's very simple. You have one more vote than the other guy. But lower population states, such as Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Delaware, Wyoming, Utah, no, they're disenfranchised because why should they even vote? There's unequal representation and no need for cooperation between the states and between the states' candidates, and regional candidates could ultimately win a national election. Think about it. If all the voters in California, Washington, and Oregon voted for somebody, they'd have a very high percentage chance of actually capturing a regional something. Now, the Connecticut Compromise was preceded by the Virginia Plan, and the Virginia Plan was proposed by James Madison, one of our presidents. Now, he believed representation should be determined by quotas of contribution, so basically, how much money you put in. The citizens would then elect a legislature, the legislature would then elect a Senate, and chosen from candidates proposed by the state legislatures the citizens choose, and then that national legislature will elect a chief executive. no president at this time, a chief executive, which ultimately means the individual citizens would have very little say in who leads the country. And to me, that's important. Now, the counter plan before the compromise was the New Jersey plan. Now, it was proposed by William Patterson of New Jersey, and I had to make sure I spelled his name right. Now, they stated that state legislatures would elect a federal executive, and the executive cannot be reelected, but could be recalled by the current executive if needed. So basically, you're a one-shot apple here. Now, that Congress would then elect a president, and individual citizens, again, have little say in who leads the country. It seems like a very bad situation. Now, the Electoral College, who gets to choose them? Well, the Electoral College electors are chosen by different methods by each state. And some of those methods include legislatures voting, governors appointing. But by the Constitution, they must meet on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December. Now, the electors then cast their votes based on the voting results of that state. And it could either be all for the winner of that state or proportionally, like in Maine and Nebraska. But there is a problem with electors. They're human, and there is a thing called faithless electors. Fortunately, faithless electors are rare, and they do carry penalties in some states. In Maine, for instance, the failure to cast the vote as directed by the electoral result cancels those votes that the elector cast, and the elector has to be replaced. Currently in New Hampshire, there is no penalty or consequence at all. The funny thing is, there's also been a lot of talk about whether or not the electors should be punished criminally. Well, as of 2020, earlier this year, the Supreme Court ruled that faithless elector laws are constitutional and faithless electors could be criminally punished. But that also begs the question, what happens if there's a tie? Well, it's highly unlikely, but in this situation, both candidates would receive 269 electoral votes. In that case, a contingent election occurs, and that's governed by the 20th Amendment. The House of Representatives will have to vote for who becomes the president, and the House of Representatives will have to keep voting until there's a winner. So even if they tie, they have to keep voting. If no winner is chosen by noon on January 20th, Inauguration Day, then the Speaker of the House becomes President-elect until the President is chosen. The law is silent on how many times they have to vote and on how many times they have to re-vote, but they must vote at least once. So what's at stake here? Well, the Constitutional Convention believes that we should choose who should choose the president. That's ultimately what's at stake. Should the people, their state legislatures, their national legislatures, members, or some other way to do it? And if the citizens choose, how do we do our best to make sure every vote counts? Because after all, there are so many more votes from other cities, towns, places, states. I'm from Maine, and while my state may not have many electoral college votes, and we do proportionally assign them, I want my vote to count as much as possible. But what was at stake historically? And that's a little bit different. Well, James Madison said, "The states, when voting for president by general tickets or by their legislatures, are a string of beads. When they make their elections by districts, some of these differing in sentiment from others and sympathizing with that of districts in other states, they are so knit together as to break the force of those geographical and other noxious parties which might render the repulsive too strong for the cohesive tendencies within the political system." Okay, complicated. But basically it says, by voting, and voting in this way, we can make sure that geographic tendencies and people who are only beholden to one party, one system, one group of people don't occur. And in Federalist Paper 68, it's amazing that Mr. Hamilton wrote something similar, that nothing was more to be desired than that every practical obstacle should be opposed to cabal intrigue and corruption. Well, when you remove geographic tendencies, you make it more difficult to have a corrupt election. But he also wrote that the executive should be independent for his continuance in office on all but the people themselves. By making every vote matter, or as much as possible matter, despite geographic locations and population densities, you make it more likely that the president answers to the people and not to any particular state or political party. So the Electoral College is a critical component of our democracy. It allows us to prevent corruption as much as possible, hold the president accountable or affirm the current office holder, reject mob rule, which is extremely dangerous, and the right to vote only exists like any other right if they are exercised. Your vote counts. Thank you for listening to my presentation today. This is a list of my references and a picture of my beautiful puppy, Guinness. There will be a document sent with the references listed in APA format, which I believe is required. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me. It's timothy.galvin3 at snhu.edu. Thank you.